Ever since the inception of powered flight, mankind has been able to traverse the globe with increasing speed and ease. But when catastrophe strikes in the air, the outcome can be devastating.
I see the plane! The engine fall down!
Many of the dead still lie indiscriminately along the runway, are so badly burned as to defy identification.
It's a horrible, horrible accident.
Whether it is human error or mechanical failure that downs an aircraft, there are multiple steps along the way where tragedy could have been avoided.
It's never one thing. It is a cascading series of links that lead to this mishap.
Sifting through the wreckage of some of history's worst disasters, we can learn the lessons that make air travel the safest form of transport today. Around the world, humanity exists only moments from catastrophe. Disaster bubbles below the surface of the earth, strikes from the heavens, or engulfs us from the sea. But we are not merely at the mercy of our planet. In our pursuit of industry, global connectivity, and reach for the stars, lives have been lost. Disasters reveal the best and worst of mankind, as one tragedy compounds another. How do these disasters occur? And what lessons can equip us when catastrophe strikes again? Every day, more than 100,000 commercial flights travel to their global destinations without incident. Subject to extensive checks and guided by a sophisticated set of protocols, GPS, radar, and onboard computers, flying is the safest it has ever been.
Unsafe is a relative term. There is nothing in aviation that is inherently safe except for staying in bed. So you're always flying around 5 or 10 miles above the earth at minus 33 degrees Celsius and flying at 500 miles an hour. So you're always balancing and mitigating risks.
In 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was loading up in Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, with mainly Dutch passengers keen to start their holidays. Like so many other aircraft that day, the Boeing 777 received flight clearance before leaving the gate, under the direction of ground control. Once ready for departure, final takeoff clearance would have come from the air traffic control tower before MH17 took to the skies. The 12-hour journey would transport the 283 passengers and 15 crew over 10,000 kilometers to Kuala Lumpur. But MH17 would never arrive, and piecing together the plane's fate would require knowledge gained from air crash investigations of the past. The world's deadliest flight disaster occurred in the Spanish Canary Islands 40 years ago. Before 2 Boeing 747 jumbos had even left the tarmac.
Many of the dead still lie indiscriminately along the runway, are so badly burned as to defy identification.
The Tenerife accident is the worst accident in aviation history, with over 500 people dying.
As is almost always the case in fatal air accidents, not one, but a series of things went wrong. The year was 1977, and in the last few years, large-scale commercial aviation had truly taken off.
This is the age of the jumbo jet. So we have airplanes that are bigger than ever before, flying farther than ever before, with more passengers than ever before.
Not all airports were equipped to cope with the changing demands.
The main airport in the Canary Islands is Las Palmas. A bomb had gone off in the Las Palmas terminals. So all those airplanes, they were diverted to a secondary airport on Tenerife.
Tenerife was not an airport which was designed for that heavy traffic.
It is a single runway and a single taxiway. Well, where do you put big airplanes? You can't put them on the runway because then nobody will take off or land. So you put them on the taxiway. That means that when you land, use the runway as a landing area and a taxiing area. So that's the situation that we had.
More than 2,000 feet above sea level, Tenerife's airport was subject to sporadic whiteouts. Awaiting instructions for takeoff that day were two loaded jumbos. Pan Am Flight 1736 and the Dutch KLM Flight 4805. KLM received instructions to taxi down the main runway, and Pan Am to follow. Pan Am were then advised to take the third exit.
The crew of the Pan Am flight missed the taxiway.
Now, with the fog, they couldn't see each other. The air traffic controller couldn't see either aircraft either. So they're all working on radio procedures.
KLM turned 180 degrees and readied for takeoff.
So the clearances to taxi were given. The problem was that the KLM aircraft began its takeoff run before it had formal takeoff clearance. It appears that the captain had confused a departure clearance, which is a clearance for the aircraft to depart in a certain procedure, with the takeoff clearance, which he didn't yet have.
KLM radioed at takeoff. The controller responded, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." But in a tragic moment of radio interference, a loud squeal covered most of the sentence. Pan Am had stepped on the transmission.
The problem with transmission reception is you can't both transmit and receive at the same time.
Pan Am's communications had blocked KLM's, and KLM's captain only heard, "Okay."
Rather than listening to that and saying, well, maybe there is some uncertainty, let's double check, he was all, kick the tyres, light the fires, let's get off and get in the air. KLM captain tried to lift the KLM aircraft off the ground to go over the other aircraft, but it wasn't able to do so. So it hit the other aircraft, smack centre in the fuselage.
The entire first-class cabin behind the cockpit was torn out of the Pan Am craft, which immediately caught fire. KLM plunged back into the tarmac, erupted in flames, and disintegrated, killing all on board.
This collision remains a gruesome, horrendous tragedy.
"583 people lost their lives in the Tenerife collision. In the investigation that followed, the cause of the accident was put down to several factors.
It was the combination of many factors, organizational factors in KLM, airport geometry, congestion of the airport, and the air traffic controller being basically unprepared for that volume of traffic.
Ambiguous radio transmissions from both aircraft crew and traffic controllers was compounded by the poor visibility and lack of proper procedural checks.
As an ex-air traffic controller, it sounded like he cleared him to take off.
Every pilot learned a lesson on that day about foggy days means double check, check again, make sure that you know where all the other aircraft are.
Unlike the KLM flight departing Tenerife, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 took off without incident, setting a course for Kuala Lumpur at a cruising altitude of 330, 33,000 feet.
MH17 was following a normal flight path, but there were a lot of abnormalities that attended this mishap.
MH17's flight path involved passing over Ukraine.
Коли вкрали надію у людей, надію в завтрашній день у кожного з нас.
Where an armed conflict was taking place.
An aircraft had been transiting that route over the Ukraine for years. The trouble is, of course, is that there was an insurgency, and it got worse in the preceding week or two. Been some unmanned aerial vehicles actually shot down in the same area.
Я дошла только до второго дома и сразу услышала этот звук сумасшедший.
In 2014, what began as anti-government protests escalated into a Russian-backed armed rebellion.
The Ukraine Civil Aviation Authority established some flight restrictions. Do not fly below flight level 320 as we get closer to the conflict zone. Malaysian Flight 17 was legal. They were legal, but they weren't safe.
Вот дома обычных жителей. Мы сейчас ехали, в багажнике люди выезжают, уже беженцы, мы дожили.
By July, the Ukraine government was trying to suppress rebel forces with air attacks.
There's a war on the ground. That is an unusual situation. Most surface or shoulder launch missiles can operate to about 20,000 feet. You know, what else is down there? You don't know.
Many other companies had taken explicit action to reroute the aircraft.
Although several airlines were now avoiding airspace over Ukraine, Malaysia Airlines was not one of them. When MH17 reached the city of Dnipropetrovsk, air traffic control requested MH17 climb to 35,000 feet to avoid a potential separation conflict with a Singapore Airlines flight. MH17 replied that they were unable to do so, possibly due to weather conditions, and requested to stay at their current altitude. This request was granted, and Singapore Airlines moved to 350 instead. Separation conflict is the aviation term for an unsafe distance between aircraft.
Normally you can figure a 1,000-foot separation. Think of a hockey puck of airspace around an aircraft, and the job of the ATC controller is to keep that hockey puck safe for that airplane.
If aircraft experience a loss of separation, they can be at risk of collision or a wake turbulence encounter. It was wake turbulence that led to horrific scenes in Queens, New York, just 2 months after 9/11.
The accident occurred in clear skies, so anybody watching from the ground can see the entire incident.
Hundreds of residents in Belle Harbor watched in horror as a passenger jet broke apart in midair and plunged into their neighborhood.
I see the plane, the engine fall down, the pitch then left side and make it straight all the way down.
Burning engines and debris showered a 5-block radius, killing 5 on the ground and all 260 people on board.
Everyone across the US thought this was terrorism. And so this is a community that has already been devastated by aviation-related disasters, and this was another one right on their doorstep.
As investigators recovered pieces of the plane, a major clue was pulled out of Jamaica Bay: the vertical stabilizer, or tail fin, of American Airlines Flight 587.
Completely normal. This is what you would expect on this flight path, all the way down to here. This is where we have the last transponder return. The impact is very shortly thereafter.
The vertical fin appeared to have been torn off in mid-air.
The vertical fin gives you directional stability.
Without it, the aircraft became uncontrollable.
What could have caused this type of damage on a perfect blue sky day, just a couple of minutes after takeoff? The preliminary investigation quickly ruled out terrorism.
An aircraft took off slightly ahead, and it was a Japan Airlines 747. They're very heavy, of course, and they create quite significant wakes.
When a wing produces lift, it generates a low-pressure region above the wing and a high-pressure region below the wing. It causes this circulation around the wings, and this generates these vortices, one from each wing.
Air safety regulations require planes to be separated by at least 4 miles on takeoff to avoid wake turbulence, a rule that was followed in this case.
American Airlines aircraft was informed, caution, wake turbulence.
Shortly after the plane took off, the pilot encountered what he believed to be the cautioned turbulence.
The first officer stomped on the rudder pedals rather heavily with full rudder deflection left and right in order to correct the wake turbulence,
which got the vertical fin going back and forth at a rate that exceeded the design load. The fin broke off, which the rest of the accident just followed on after that.
An aircraft just crashed to the south of the field. It's a huge fire, tremendous amount of black smoke.
The official findings were pilot error by the first officer, who employed unnecessary and excessive use of the rudder.
The question that's raised here, though, is why would a reasonable pilot do this? That causes into question, what was the training? The second thing would be, did the manufacturer tell the users to avoid extreme input in the rudder pedals?
We're doing everything we can to deal with this, and I know that the people of New York can rise to any challenge.
In addition to pilot error, the National Transportation Safety Board found that training by the airline and poor rudder design were major contributing factors.
This pilot had a previous occasion where he'd overreacted to aircraft wake turbulence, and this was traced back to the training.
The first officer commanded a series of aggressive control inputs to the rudder pedal that maneuvered the airplane into a large oscillating side slip.
As MH17 tracked over eastern Ukraine, It was not just other aircraft that posed a potential threat. Approaching the Ukraine-Russia border, radio contact went dead.
The aircraft was flying peacefully along on its cruise altitude, and the next minute was plummeting to Earth.
On the ground, eyewitnesses caught the last moments of MH17 as a fireball on the horizon.
Но я видела, как она летела сверху. Вот так, летела, 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 крутилась, крутилась, аж шлакоблочина. Что шлакоблочина даже упал.
Across a wide expanse of villages, paddocks, and farmlands, aircraft pieces and bodies rained down. They fell in fields, through roofs, into gardens.
It was spread over 50 kilometers, and that's not just wreckage, but the unfortunate victims as well.
The suspicions of what had caused MH17 to fall from the sky over a conflict zone were immediate. The West claimed the plane had been hit by a surface-to-air missile fired by pro-Russian rebels. The Russians suggested a Ukrainian government jet had shot down MH17. The Ukraine government immediately shut down its airspace to any further traffic.
С неба одна женщина упала в кресле прямо в одной бабушке через дом, абсолютно голая. Улетела.
Ukrainian emergency workers began the process of locating bodies.
Initially, Ukrainian authorities, were doing the investigation, they realized they could not do it in an unbiased manner. So they called in the Dutch authorities to do the investigation.
The kind of approach to all of this work is to do things as quickly as possible. Time is of the essence too.
There were reports of pro-Russian separatists tampering with the wreckage and blocking access to the site, delaying the investigation.
There were times when the accident investigation team would advance to near the accident site, and there would be too much shooting, or mortars would come in, and they said, we just got to get out of here.
Villagers, trapped in the middle of a conflict they didn't start, were now key witnesses to an international air disaster.
Я бы не летела, потому что боюсь тоже, как вот эти невинные люди, упасть.
The investigation in MH17 involved lots of local people assisting in the recovery of remains. That is obviously a really challenging thing for any community to be involved in that sort of work. People who don't see deceased people, don't see body parts as part of their ordinary daily life, often find it very, very hard, either at the time or sometimes months and years later.
Less than a week after MH17 went down, bodies began arriving in the Netherlands for examination and identification.
That situation, you have two processes running in parallel. You have the humanitarian process, which is about returning the deceased to their loved ones. And you have the forensic process, which is about collecting the evidence which may be used in a subsequent court proceeding.
With remains ranging from full bodies to small body parts, the identification process could range from weeks to months.
Pre-screening a body, looking for foreign material or dangerous objects, taking fingerprints, looking at their personal possessions, having all that documented in a way that families could actually receive those personal items. Then you'll move on to the areas where you're going to look at features that can be used to identify them and compare that with clinical records of a missing person in life.
As hard as it may be to comprehend a commercial airliner full of passengers being mistakenly shot down, it's happened before, by a US naval ship. The year was 1988, towards the end of the Iran-Iraq War. On the morning of the 3rd of July, a guided missile cruiser, USS Vincennes, was in the Persian Gulf in Iranian territorial waters. It was engaging small gunboats. Around the same time, Iranian Air Flight 655 was taking off from Tehran's Bandar Abbas Airport, heading for Dubai. It was a routine, scheduled international flight. During the firefight, using their state-of-the-art Aegis combat system, the USS Vincennes immediately began tracking Flight 655. They claimed it was sending out squawks on a military frequency from its transponder.
Radar works on the principle that the radio signal goes up and hits the airplane and comes back. You measure how long it took to get from here to there, and you'll say, well, that is 10 miles away by the amount of time it takes. Transponders are what are called secondary radar. The radar signal goes out and it hits a receiver on the airplane. And that receiver squirts back 4-digit code that says, I am 1234.
The crew interpreted what they received as the aircraft being an F-14. The only operators of F-14s at that time were the United States and the Iranian military.
The naval crew began sending out multiple challenges to the aircraft. But according to a report by the International Civil Aviation Authority, 7 of these were on a military channel inaccessible to the flight, and 4 on the International Air Distress Channel. Only the last challenge clearly identified Flight 655's transponder code. There was no response from the flight crew.
The activities in the area would indicate that there may be hostile aircraft at that altitude.
Assuming it was a hostile F-14 Tomcat, USS Vincennes took action.
The United States Navy ship fired a missile at the Iranian Airbus. Destroying the aircraft and everybody on board.
Their mistake cost the lives of 290 civilians.
It was an environment outside of the norm of civil aviation. In a war zone, civil aviation is greatly compromised. civil aviation should not go on in the same way as it normally does in peacetime.
Within days of the MH17 air disaster, Dutch authorities received part of the plane critical to any investigation: the black boxes. But they revealed little.
Everything was fine right up until the tapes stopped.
Although investigators couldn't tell what had caused the crash from the black box, they could tell where it occurred. By triangulating the recordings from the microphones in the cockpit, the investigators were able to discern that the cause came, suspiciously, from outside the aircraft. A useful lead, but ultimately, the greatest hope for determining the cause of the crash was the wreckage. It arrived months later in the Netherlands, transported on flatbed trucks under police escort. Piece by piece, the remnants of MH17 were painstakingly assembled.
In most cases, they will start laying them out horizontally on the hangar floor, then build a jig to start mounting all these pieces onto in order to get the aircraft back to the original condition as possible.
As the front of the plane took shape, the cause of MH17's demise became clear.
There are certain types of damage that are attendant to an explosion. There are penetrations to the aluminum fuselage. There are traces of explosive that are left behind.
Self-evidently, if there was a bomb, the explosion outwards would leave rips in the fuselage, which would indicate an explosion towards the outside. Whereas in this case, there were actually holes in the fuselage, which indicated that the fuselage had been penetrated by shrapnel from outside the aircraft.
They started doing experimentation with what size warhead it would take to be able to cause that amount of damage and how far away from the aircraft it would have to be in order to get the shrapnel pattern that they had on the skin.
The Dutch Safety Board reached their conclusion in October 2015. MH17 was shot down by a Russian-made Buk 9M38 surface-to-air missile. Fired from territory held by pro-Russian separatists. Buk surface-to-air missiles can travel at 3 times the speed of sound, to a range of 80,000 feet. They are designed to seek out fighter jets, detonating just before hitting their target.
Ze van begin af aan al weten wat er gebeurd is.
Beetje angstig. Ik denk dat politiek te gevoelig ligt.
In the case of MH17, confirming the information garnered by triangulating the black box recordings, it exploded to the left and above the cockpit. The force of the blast caused explosive decompression, resulting in both the cockpit and the tail separating from the fuselage.
Unconsciousness would have been within a few seconds. They would have been surprised and then they'd have been asleep.
Now, where the Buk missile came from, there was evidence that it had come from a vehicle which had crossed from the Russian side into the Ukraine.
Despite multiple lines of evidence supporting a Buk missile strike, Russia continued to deny any involvement.
Фрагменты какие-то ракетной установки, которые...
У нас есть протоколы по этому поводу, после чего их использование было запрещено, и ракеты были сняты с вооружения российской армии.
While tensions between the East and the West hampered investigations into the MH17 crash, historically, they've accelerated aircraft research and development. In 1960, the KGB caught wind of a combined French and British program to design a supersonic commercial aircraft called Concorde.
The Concorde could fly at Mach 2, so it could fly more than twice as fast as a normal airline. And it could fly way higher, above 50,000 feet.
During development, Concorde was reportedly the subject of a massive espionage effort by the Soviet Union.
The political environment at the time, it was like the space race, which is going on at the same time. They wanted to get their supersonic transport in the air and flyable before the Concorde.
The Soviets' famed aerospace engineer, Andrei Tupolev, was put to the task. The aircraft he designed, Tupolev Tu-144, beat Concorde to the skies by 2 months in 1968. The West was furious. The craft was so similar to the Concorde that it was nicknamed the Concordski. Dart-like in their appearance, with distinctive delta-shaped wings, the two aircraft were hard to tell apart.
The delta wing has several advantages for supersonic flight. One, its attachment to the fuselage is sturdier.
The delta wing design reduces drag by delaying the shock waves that occur as the aircraft approaches the speed of sound. Designers of supersonic aircraft found that the delta wing increased stability at high speeds. But at lower speeds, the aircraft needed to maintain a high angle of attack, a profile that created vortex patterns along each leading wing edge.
The vortices that were generated by the wings created a much higher low pressure area over the wing, which enhanced the lift.
But there were key differences. The Tu-144 was longer and its engines more powerful. It also had distinctive moustache canards, retractable foreplanes near the cockpit, that aided stability and lift. It was this design feature that indirectly became the focus of a horrific air accident before either aircraft entered commercial service. The site was the Paris Air Show in 1973. The East and West were finally coming head-to-head in a full display of supersonic rivalry. Before a crowd of 350,000 people, Concorde flew first.
They went and performed for the crowd, very mild, just show off that this airplane can fly. The Russian crew decided that they wanted to show off. In the process of showing off the airplane, they exceeded the structural limits.
After a low pass over spectators, the Tupolev pilot entered a show-stopping steep climb. He then took the aircraft into a dramatic descent. Frantic efforts to pull out of the dive failed.
It broke apart in air and came apart right over the town.
The entire crew were killed, along with 8 people on the ground. More than 60 people were severely injured. The spectacular disaster triggered intense debate and finger-pointing. The Soviets blamed the aircraft's severe maneuver on a French fighter jet, which was in flight at the same time. The West counter-accused the Soviets of espionage, blaming Tupolev's structural flaws on stolen, false Concorde plans. Whatever triggered the disastrous mid-air disintegration, the tragedy sent the development of the Tupolev into a downward spiral. Concorde took the lead and became the first supersonic aircraft to enter commercial service in 1976. Concorde was in a class of its own. Faster than a speeding bullet, it could rocket passengers from New York to London in just over 3 hours. With tickets only the rich could afford, Concorde quickly became a symbol of wealth and prestige. It was also considered one of the safest aircraft in service. Until a catastrophic crash more than 2 decades later. A smoking wreck of ash and debris was all that remained of a hotel in Vincennes, France, after being hit by a Concorde on the 25th of July, 2000. The Air France flight crashed shortly after taking off from Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport. 4 staff in the hotel were killed, along with 100 passengers and 9 crew. The accident was caused by a metal strip from an engine cowl door, but not from the Concorde. The piece had come loose from another plane, which had taken off 5 minutes prior.
Well, there was nothing wrong prior to him starting the takeoff roll except that metal strip on the runway, which he wouldn't have been able to see.
The part had been replaced in Houston during a check earlier that month.
But every part on an airplane is made to a specific design, and if it is not done, then that becomes an unapproved part.
The replacement part was neither manufactured or installed to specifications. It was to have fatal consequences for those on board the Concorde. As the tire ran over the debris, it exploded under enormous heat and pressure.
A big part of the tire came up and hit the fuel tank. And then the expulsion of jet fuel was ignited.
As the captain lost thrust on 2 engines, the landing gear jammed, and he was unable to lift the plane higher.
Unfortunately, the fire that took hold was very fierce. The heat from that quickly took effect and shut down both of the engines on the left side. The aircraft rolled left and crashed into the ground.
So it shows how dependent the end product of safe aviation is upon what might appear to be the smallest little part.
Although the horrific crash was blamed on the small piece of runway debris, Concorde's tires had previously been a feature of concern.
The tires are subject to extreme heat and weight. Several years before the accident, the NTSB investigated 4 incidents having to do with tires coming apart and striking the airplane.
Tragically, modifications to the Concorde's fleet were not made until after the crash.
They changed the tires so that they could better withstand some of the speeds. They also put Kevlar around the fuel tanks on the aircraft. But the decline of the Concorde program had already started. The Concorde accident happened at a very bad time for the airline industry. Revenues were down, people weren't flying as much. The Concorde program itself was always a very, very tight budget.
3 years later, Concorde made its final transatlantic journey. The final journey of MH17 forced airline operators to reassess the balance between hazard avoidance and the cost efficiency of direct routes.
In the context of what was going on in the weeks and months before, it is very likely that they thought they were shooting down an airplane from Ukraine.
She was for peace. She is for peace, and she will be forever for peace.
The question is, how can we improve this system to make it safer? Because that's the end goal of any aircraft accident investigation.
The airlines are now far more thorough at doing their risk mitigation around conflict zones. So that's been something which is going to have far-reaching positive effects.
While risks were known at the time of a disaster, an adverse event was thought to be incredibly unlikely.
It's an unlikely event, and the trouble is many accidents are unlikely events.
Often when we hear of something like this, we'll say, how could anyone ever do this? Who could be so stupid? But that's the wrong question. Right question, how could this make sense? How could someone think that they were doing the right thing? And that applies to every aviation mishap.
The legacy of the 298 people who lost their lives on board MH17 is a greater understanding that the unthinkable can happen.
But it is time for action because it's just terrible.
And must be avoided at all costs.